We know that despotic forms of government dismiss the significance and value of individual human lives. Today, we'll explore some implications of a government's dismissal of the right to life. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on the right to life. And each week we take a deep dive into what really matters, what's really true, what's really at stake. Because the major media won't do that. The major media repeats canards, falsehoods, and repeats them and repeats them and repeats them until the general public believes them. And it even wants pro-life people to believe them. Sadly, I have found many pro-life people believe the major media. For example, the idea that Roe versus Wade has settled the abortion issue, or that it was even dealing with it in an orderly way. No, they lied in Roe versus Wade. Justice Blackmun lied. And many people don't realize it's a companion decision that came down the same day, Doe versus Bolton. Roe dealt with the laws of Texas. Doe versus Bolton dealt with the laws of Georgia. Roe v. Wade is very confusing, and many pro-abortion folks don't like Roe v. Wade. It doesn't make sense, literally. It's on a collision course with itself. So my new book, The Evil Twins, Roe and Doe, How the Supreme Court Unleashed Medical Killing, I think you'll find it interesting. You can pre-order it on Amazon or at New Regency Pub at a discount. You can do the pre-order now, get a discounted price, but I go in depth as to what really happened on January 22nd, 73, but perhaps more importantly, what's really going on now in the abortion industry and how Roe v. Wade does not make sense. It can't make sense. Even Justice Ginsburg said it does not grant a woman the right to choose. Justice Blackmun said the same thing. He was not granting a woman the right to do whatever she wants with her body. That's a quote from Roe v. Wade. Then why does the media say that that's what it does? Why do radical feminists and pro-aborts tell you that's what it does? Because they lie. I'm sorry. And the media, it lies to you. If there's one thing that President Trump did accomplish, it was getting across to a lot of people that the media can be fake. Very, very fake. Well, today we're going to go in depth on another aspect of that, the falsehood. Again, if you're a pro-life person, you already know the media is lying to you. They say that's not a human baby. Well, PETA says if you do an abortion of a horse, you're killing a little pony. That's not part of the mare's body as they take out those little ponies. And the poor animal rights activists say, hey, that pony can't survive. Why are you doing that? They know, they see self-evident truths. But somehow an abortion, that's not a human baby. No, there is a deliberate lie. And that's what we're looking at in the major media now, is deliberate lying, what's known generically as gaslighting. Just deliberate lying. We're going to join today with Doug Johnston of the National Right to Life Committee's national office. He's one of the finest lobbyists in Washington, D.C., because he deals with the facts. You need to know that the abortion industry and the hard left wants to bring back a zombie. That's right. They want to bring back a legal zombie from the dead, Equal Rights Amendment. It didn't pass. It hasn't passed. They want to pretend that it has. Believe it or not. And they have a media that will lie. That's right. Perhaps it's occurring to you that the major dominant media culture intentionally lies. And if you disagree, you're attacked. You're the liar. So again, on Roe v. Wade and the actual abortion industry, I want to let you know about my new book, The Evil Twins, Roe and Doe, How the Supreme Court Unleashed Medical Killing. It goes into detail on those two decisions, Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. I want to equip you with the objective facts. I use the statements of the justices and people on both sides, legal experts on both sides of the abortion issue, that point out the folly that Roe v. Wade is and point out that Doe v. Bolton is the deadly decision. We're going to talk when we come back to Doug Johnston about the zombie law, the Equal Rights Amendment. It kind of reminds me of that movie, Weekend at Bernie's, where the guy they were with died. It was kind of a college comedy, and they had to pretend he was alive the whole time. That's what they want to do with the laws now. You're being lied to by the media. You need to know that. You need to spot their lies and be ready for the battle at hand, because we're in a battle of ideas. And if you don't know that, then you've already lost.
Life Matters continues after this.
You know about our car donation program at California Pro-Life. We use one of the most respected programs in the nation. Go to the California Pro-Life page, californiaprolife.org. Scroll to the bottom and click on Donate My Car. It's that easy. Did you know you can also donate any vehicle, boat, motorhome, or even personal property? If you are nearing retirement age, you can also get a tax deduction by earmarking a portion of your upcoming compulsory distributions from your 401k. Just email us for information. California Pro-Life is fighting to equip California pro-lifers with understanding and the tools to again protect the unborn and other vulnerable innocents. Thank you for your help in this battle. Go to californiaprolife.org. That's californiaprolife.org for more information.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. I'm Brian Johnston, your host, and I want to introduce an old friend, Doug Johnson. All of us at National Right to Life consider him one of the best lobbyists in Washington, D.C., but we're not the only ones. And he has been honored by other organizations as being one of the most effective federal lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And it's a real honor to have Doug on for a very important issue. Doug, good to have you.
Brian, it's great to be with you.
We're looking at the return of a zombie in Washington, and it's hard to believe, but in all earnestness, we're seeing pro-abortion forces want to revive a zombie. Can you tell us what that means?
Well, we're talking about the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA. And many of your listeners may remember this as some dim vestige of the 1970s, but it's back, or at least there is a very concerted attempt underway to revive it and I would say airdrop it into the U.S. Constitution. And this involves a number of political forces, political players in all three branches of government. There's going to be a lot of activity on this in the months ahead, and I think a lot of coverage in the mainstream media. And there's a lot at stake because we are talking about the text of the Constitution. And National Right to Life has recognized, at least since the early 1980s, that this language of the ERA would very likely be employed in the courts in a way that would invalidate virtually all limits on abortion, would mandate federal funding of abortion and government funding of abortion in all health-related programs. It would really, for the pro-abortion side, be a legal nuke, you might say. And so we have to take this very seriously, even though the legal theories on which this is being advanced are highly questionable.
Yes, exactly. Some of the background, I know you'll get into it. I'm particularly concerned at the dismissal of constitutional law and how you actually pass an amendment to the Constitution. And it looks like they intentionally are pretending that those laws don't exist.
Well, that's right. The Constitution contains very clear rules for how the Constitution should be amended, may be amended. And Congress followed those in 1972, and it proposed the Equal Rights Amendment. There was debate. There were some revisions made along the way in a number of successive Congresses, and then finally, through the regular process provided under Article 5 of the Constitution, both houses approved it by a 2/3 margin. Now, that just starts the process. That submits a proposal to the states. Mm-hmm. And part of that proposal was a ratification deadline. It said that this would not be valid unless it was ratified by the requisite number of states within 7 years. And that number is 3/4 of the states, which is currently 38 states. Mm-hmm. Now, they got off to a fast start. There were about 30 states, as I recall, that ratified in a rush within the first year. But then people started really considering some of the implications of this language including implications on abortion law. And the process slowed down quickly. And as they were getting to the end of the 7-year period, they saw they weren't going to make it. They were up to 35, and 5 of those states had reconsidered and taken back their ratifications, which is called rescission. So they had 30 or 35, depending on which theory you embrace. And they went to Congress and said, we need more time. Would you extend the deadline, please? And everybody on our side said, you can't do that. It's already been submitted. You can't bait and switch. But they purported to do it anyway, Brian. They purported to extend the deadline for 39 months. This was back in 1978. But even though we think that was unconstitutional, the issue was never tested because they didn't get any more states. So at the end of the second so-called deadline, now this is 10 years after Congress has approved it, mind you, they still had only 30 or 35 states, depending on which theory. So everybody agreed it was dead in 1982. Mm-hmm. Those who wanted an ERA in Congress said, well, we're going to try again. We're going to start over. Well, at least they were following the right process, but we said, this language is flawed. This language can be used to invalidate limits on abortion across the board. Mm-hmm. Some pro-abortion groups were already using state equal rights amendments in just that fashion. And we said, we're opposed to it. National Right to Life is opposed to it. The Catholic Bishops' Conference was opposed to it. Just about all the pro-life groups were opposed to sending that language out to the states again, unless it was changed. We proposed specific language to render it harmless on abortion. And unfortunately, the ERA advocates said nothing doing. Nobody's going to tamper with our language. And so their amendment went down to defeat, Brian, on the floor of the House of Representatives in 1983. And the single biggest reason for that was the pro-life opposition. In fact, 14 co-sponsors voted against it, and that was almost all on the pro-life issue. So then for many years, everybody just understood that it was dead because they couldn't get Congress by 2/3 to approve what was now recognized as a pro-abortion constitutional amendment, and they weren't willing to change it. And then, Brian, they came up with something in 1994 called the 3-state theory. And without going into all of the contortions of it, I could summarize it as a theory that deadlines don't matter, that they have infinite time to get the 3/4 of the states. Mm-hmm. Or if they don't matter at all, at least that Congress has infinite time to change them retroactively. You may say that's not how things usually work. Things expire. At the end of a Congress, for example, all the bills that haven't passed expire. The current Congress can't go back and override a veto by President Carter. And that's the way constitutional amendments work as well, at least if they have deadlines included in them, as this one did. But they decided to assert that they could do this and to just try to make it so, to try to make the perception become reality. For many years, they didn't get very far on this. We opposed these resolutions in state legislatures successfully for 23 years in a row. But eventually they found 3 states that were willing to adopt resolutions saying that they were ratifying this long expired amendment. The states were Nevada in 2017, Illinois in 2018, and then Virginia in January of 2020. So it has now been proclaimed by important political players, including attorneys general of many states, that the ERA has been ratified. And they want the Biden administration to say it's been ratified. That hasn't happened yet, but I think it is likely to happen. Mm-hmm. And they want Congress to say it's been ratified. And to that latter end, they have reintroduced in Congress resolutions that say the deadline is removed retroactively. Now, again, we think this is blatantly unconstitutional, but I believe that their intent is to create a perception in the land, about the land and in the population, that it's a done deal. Mm-hmm. And to present the courts with a fait accompli, you might say, to say, courts, the executive branch agrees that this is part of the Constitution. So what they purport to be able to do is by majority vote have the Congress say that this is so and make it so. So they would like to go back into court, federal court, and say, Judge, we now have the executive branch saying that this has been ratified, this ERA, and we have the 2 houses of Congress saying it's been ratified, and you courts ought to just not mess with it. You ought to just steer clear of this. And thereby they would have evaded the constitutional requirements and basically done an end run and got their language in the Constitution. Now, we intend to contest this every step of the way, just as we have for decades. And I believe we have a very good chance of prevailing in the end. But it is important, and we're going to be communicating and encouraging pro-life people all around the country to communicate with their representatives in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, to oppose this, to oppose it because it is going to be used for pro-abortion purposes if it goes into the Constitution, and to oppose it because this is an unconstitutional attempt to do retroactively and by simple majorities what the Constitution says requires 2/3 majorities and has to be done from start to finish, not backwards. The Senate is particularly important. The House passed this last year. The Senate did not take it up. The Senate, of course, is now becoming under Democrat control, and all the Senate Democrats are already on record in favor of saying the ERA is ratified. And there are a couple of Republicans who've taken that position as well. So we want to make sure that all the rest of the Republicans, all of the pro-life Republicans, do not embrace this, that they see this clearly as a pro-abortion tool, and that they see clearly also the constitutional violations that are occurring here. And we think we have a very strong case on both of those, but we should not be complacent. We need to go to each and every member.
Yeah. Listeners to our program know that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, probably the most, if I could say, the most notorious abortion advocating justice of the Supreme Court, she actually is brutally honest. And among other things, folks know that she did not actually like Roe versus Wade and Doe v. Bolton. She felt it didn't give women a right to choose. She admitted what it really does is it gives abortionists the right to choose. They make the decision. And she's very honest about that. But when we come back, I'd like to hear Doug explain her comments on this, on the Equal Rights Amendment. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is actually in some ways on our side. So we'll be right back. You're listening to Life Matters.
Life Matters continues after this.
We are individuals that lived all over the world, in some of the most beautiful jungles and mountains on Earth. We were there as missionaries, but we have also become coffee aficionados. Our travels have introduced us to the most delicious and extraordinary coffees we've ever tasted. Now we import those same beans, roast them fresh at your request, and fly these savory coffees directly to you. Winged Spur Coffee. You will taste that rich freshness, roasted at your command, then flown straight to your home. Winged Spur Coffee. Try the best coffee you've ever tasted. Go to wingedspurcoffee.com. That's wingedspurcoffee.com.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
So we're back on Life Matters. We're talking with Doug Johnston of the National Right to Life Committee in Washington, D.C. He has been a lobbyist with National Right to Life since the early 80s and is respected not only by the pro-life community and in particular the folks that are affiliated with National. We know what Doug can do, but other organizations have recognized Doug Johnston as the most effective lobbyist in Washington, D.C. It's because Doug gets into the real details. I really appreciate that. We're talking about the ERA. It's a zombie that's being revived by abortion advocates. And Doug, when we left, we were just getting to an old friend, so to speak, an old name from the Supreme Court, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the most radical of abortion advocates. And yet she's been brutally honest. What has she said about this?
Well, Brian, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a strong advocate for the ERA, both before and after she went on the Supreme Court. But last February of 2020, when the House was already planning in a few days to take up this so-called deadline removal measure, she was at a forum at Georgetown Law School Center, and she was asked about this matter, and she said, and I quote, "I would like to see a new beginning. I'd like to start over. There's too much controversy about latecomers. Virginia, long after the deadline passed, Plus, a number of states have withdrawn their ratifications. So if you count a latecomer on the plus side, how can you disregard states that say, we've changed our minds? End of quote. So she packed a lot in there. Mm-hmm. She recognizes the deadline has passed. She obviously is not regarded as something inconsequential. And she even notes that she implies here that states have the right to change their minds. And I mentioned earlier, 5 states did withdraw their ratifications. They rescinded before the true deadline in 1979. So by our reckoning, only 30 states ratified, not 35, or at least there's a very strong argument that that's the case. That's on the process issue, on what the Constitution requires when you want to amend the Constitution. I'd like to say a little more, too, about the likely impact of this language on abortion law if it were to become part of the Constitution. And you know, Brian, when you and I first started debating this issue back in the early 80s, the other side would deny that that was so. They would say this was a scare tactic, this was a boogeyman. The term big lie was used more than once. There were whole articles written by Catholic nuns insisting that it had nothing to do with abortion. There was a big debate about this, and we thought at the time that we had a strong case, and then we saw that pro-abortion groups were actually starting to use ERAs that had been adopted in some state constitutions to challenge limits on government funding of abortion, for example, and successfully in some cases. But in recent years, there's been a noteworthy development, which is that the younger generation of pro-abortion activists are openly proclaiming that the ERA would entrench and expand what they call abortion rights. They are proclaiming it. They are saying, this is why we need the ERA. This is why we need it now, because there's a conservative Supreme Court. Roe versus Wade is in jeopardy. Let me just give you a few samples. Here's from a National Organization for Women paper on the ERA. It says that, quote, an ERA properly interpreted could negate the hundreds of laws that have been passed restricting access to abortion care, end of quote. NARAL Pro-Choice America said in a national alert in the last Congress, quote, the ERA would reinforce the constitutional right to abortion. It would require judges to strike down anti-abortion laws, end of quote. I could go on for quite a while reading quotes like that. We actually have what we call a quote sheet that's 4 pages long, full of those kind of quotes, and they're all pretty recent, and they're from prominent people in pro-abortion groups and their lawyers. So what we saw back in the 80s and called to the attention of lawmakers, they are now acknowledging and proclaiming. Now, you still hear denials occasionally, either from people who are just being duplicitous. For example, there was a op-ed by a lawyer in Utah a few days ago that was insisting this was all a silly claim and it had nothing to do with abortion. You'll still run into that from time to time, but they know better. They've admitted otherwise, and no pro-life member of Congress should be fooled.
Mm-hmm. I understand the speaker, maybe because she was around back then, but she has made those types of assertions that this somehow has nothing to do with abortion. And yet the evidence is pretty clear. Doug, before we go, is that quote sheet available? Is there a place where we can send people to get this information? They're going to need to act on it.
It is on the National Right to Life website. Mm-hmm. There's an ERA page, and people will find there not only the list of quotes that I mentioned of the ERA Abortion Connection, but a number of other documents, including a briefing paper that goes into the recent developments on this issue in the courts, in the Congress, in the executive branch. And I might also mention that we endorse a Twitter account, which is sort of a news feed on ERA-related issues, and it's called ERA No Shortcuts. Mm-hmm. That's all one word, ERA No Shortcuts. They don't just cover the ERA Abortion Connection, but the whole gamut of developments with respect to ongoing court cases, activity in state legislatures, what different groups are saying, and so forth. But anyone who really wants to stay up to date in real time on what's happening with this rather complicated and fast-moving issue, that is a good resource. ERA No Shortcuts on Twitter.
Excellent. So go to nrlc.org and to the ERA page. You can download detailed information. We're talking to Doug Johnston, the National Right to Life Committee, and I personally consider Doug one of the heroes of the pro-life movement. He gets the details right, and most importantly, timing. You're looking at this coming at us now in the spring of 2021. Our opponents, they're feeling their oats. They think they can assert something and say it's true, and people will simply believe them. You have the facts on your side if you'll avail of them. And so we want to give you those facts. Again, go to nrlc.org, nrlc.org, go to the page on the ERA. And then if you're tweeting on Twitter, there's a special Twitter account. And Doug, that address again?
It's at ERA, no shortcuts, all one word.
At ERA, no shortcuts. We've been talking to Doug Johnston, and Doug is a real resource for all of us in the pro-life movement. Right now, he's telling us that this is not just some arcane information. If you've just been tuning in, if you want to rehear this, go to the podcast. There's a lot of details, but this is a push by advocates of abortion to get everything all at once. And if you aren't ready for it, if you're a pro-life community in your state, if they're not ready, and if Congress signs on to this, particularly members of the Senate, then it is of grave consequence. We have to equip people with the facts. That's what we like to do here at Life Matters. Doug, anything else before we go?
No, just that I implore people to take this seriously because there is so much at stake. If they were able to pull this off by some subterfuge, this would have an enormous impact on the pro-life agenda, the pro-life laws and policies in every state in perpetuity, because it would actually be in the Constitution. You know, Roe versus Wade obviously lacked any textual basis in the Constitution. This would actually be text in the Constitution. And we need absolutely to make sure that this does not succeed, this effort, this end run does not succeed.
Exactly. Doug, thank you very much. We really appreciate you and your work, and we're committed, like you, to stop this resurrection of the ERA.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure.
Learn more about everything in today's show online at lifematters.life, where you'll find all the resources you need to protect life. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life. Wherever you are in the nation, you can find out more at National Right to Life. You can find vital pro-life information and also find the access to your state and local Right to Life affiliate. Get informed and get involved.